Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 1195. 1195. I believe it's the 19th. I believe it's the 19th of July. Sunday. Thank you so much for tuning in. Yesterday in the video, as I was talking about the FBI Case Agent 1, as he's referred to in the Mueller report, in the Horowitz report, and also this senior intelligence analyst, this Brian Alton, I was suggesting yesterday that this 40-page memo of the subsource, I said whoever saw that or was briefed on it is absolutely going to be indicted if they were part of the crew that continued to push the Russia investigation, the investigation into Flynn, and all the rest. And so I do have some information on that today. And the fact of the matter is, both Brian Alton and Stephen Soma were part of the Operation Crossfire Hurricane team. They were part of the Crossfire Hurricane team, and that means that everyone on the Crossfire Hurricane team would have likely been briefed on this, which would include Peter's been stroking us, Luce Lisa Page, McCabe, and some of the other in the tier below them. And of course, they likely would have briefed Comey and the Deputy Attorney General, at least, possibly the Attorney General. So, in other words, I have answered that question. It wasn't just Alton and Soma who did this interview, scribbled out their notes, and shoved it into a file cabinet somewhere. Nope, they were on the Crossfire Hurricane team, which means that that information would have been shared likely with at least ways the top people running the Crossfire Hurricane investigations. So there you go. Answered that question. So I did get a chance to go through this interview with the subsource, and it is the most highly redacted, declassified report, or whatever you want to call it, transcript, that I have ever seen. I don't know how many of you took a look at that for yourself, but if you did, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is the most redacted thing I've ever seen. It is almost impossible to tell what's going on. I had to read very slowly, and it's just so broken up that you can hardly tell what the hell you're reading. And I was never really able to tell a lot about what I was reading other than the overall sort of take that you get from it, which is that this subsource told the FBI pretty straightforwardly that he couldn't back the allegations made in the Steele dossier as being facts that could be proven. He basically told the FBI, it was a bunch of hearsay. A lot of the stuff that I gave Steele was totally unconfirmed, just hearsay, just rumor, barroom talk. Literally, they were in a bar having beers, getting what he said, getting pretty trashed, and just laughing and talking and throwing the stuff out. And he passes that on to Steele, and Steele puts it in the dossier. And the subsource is telling the FBI that that's basically the way it is. He just, he was surprised that Steele put that into the dossier, or that they went and got a FISA warrant based on that. He said there was other information in there that's being apparently attributed to him because he's the subsource that he'd never heard before. So he's not sure where it came from. So yes, you can get that general take on it, but every name, every date, every place, totally blocked out. You can't see it, which makes it kind of hard, because it's hard to get a frame of reference for what you're reading when every day, date, name, and place is blacked out. Because a lot of this type of stuff, this information, those are important things. Who, where, when, the who, where, and when, you can forget about it. It's all blacked out. There are other large sections where where even the question is blacked out. You don't even know the question. The FBI agent's question is blacked out. So it's heavily redacted. But I went ahead and spent about 2 hours, more than that, actually closer to 3 hours, burning the midnight oil, trying to make some sense of exactly what it was I was reading. So here is what I did. I just took these note cards, and as I read through it, I just scribbled down things that I could take from what it was I was reading. Not so much I could draw any major conclusions, just things that I was reading in that wasn't redacted, that I could pull out of it to try to write it all down and then go back and read it and see if I could put something together based on everything I wrote down. So I'm going to go through this with you. I have like four note cards here. So I'm just going to go through this with you. And this is just things that I wrote down as I was reading through this transcript of the subsource being interviewed. First of all, I'll give you the basics before I get started on that. I'll give you the setup here. This, of course, is the interview that was conducted by Brian Alton, who was the senior FBI intelligence analyst, along with Stephen Soma, who, of course, is referred to in the Horowitz report as FBI Agent 1, Case Agent 1. And this, of course, we now know that both Alton and Soma were members of the Crossfire Hurricane team. This interview took place over 3 days, a period of 3 days. It was conducted at the Washington FBI field office. There were 4 people there, not just Brian Alton. 4 people on the government side. Brian Alton and Stephen Soma asking the questions for the most part. But you also had an attorney from the U.S. Department of Justice National Security Division. And I think it was the chief. I think they refer to it in the setup here as the chief from the U.S. Department of Justice National Security Division was also there, as well as another attorney. So you had 2 attorneys from the Department of Justice National Security Division, one of them being named as the chief, I guess that means the top guy, at the Department of Justice NSD, and a lawyer. So those 4, Alton, Soma, the chief from the National Security Division, and another attorney from the National Security Division of the DOJ. Those were the 4 people who were there for the interview. And then you had, of course, the subsource, the primary subsource, and his attorney. So a total of 6 people attending that set of hearings for a period of 3 days. Now, the very beginning, they ask the subsource to basically give his background. So he lays out his bio. Again, because names, dates, and places are all redacted, it's kind of difficult to tell exactly. But as you read through the whole thing, and he talks about places he traveled to or what have you, you begin to kind of put it together. So as best I can tell, I'm not 100% sure that this is accurate, but pretty sure that this individual grew up in the UK, and after he graduated from, I guess, college in the UK, he went to the US and studied there and got a PhD, and then somewhere in that general range, while he was going through his PhD program and doing further studies even after that, he went to Russia. And I think he has some kind of background in Russian or Russian studies or something. And that's his background. But he is not a Russian. The subsource is not a Russian. And he's lived and worked most of his life in the United States. Although he has apparently, from what I could gather here, he has spent some time living and working in Russia as well. And even though he's from the UK, he only occasionally visits there. He's been a resident of the United States for quite a long time. I'm not sure of this man's age, but based on the amount of years that he talks about working for various people in the United States, trips to Russia, I can assume this man's probably in his at least 50s, probably 60s, maybe a little older than that. So he's not a real young person. And he has extensive ties and contacts in Russia. And he talks about that. And most of the 6 sources that he talks about, the people he talked to, were also either people in Russia or people in the United States who visit or travel to Russia or speak Russian or have Russian contacts. None of these people, nor the subsource, keep this in mind also, the subsource, who of course was an employee for Christopher Steele at Orbis Intelligence and had been working for Christopher Steele at Orbis for about 10 years, his expertise is not in anything related to intelligence. He's not in intelligence. He's never been in intelligence. He's never worked for the government or any intelligence agency. He's not involved in politics. He's not very political. He's apolitical, essentially. His expertise is in business intelligence. Business intelligence, which is something totally different than, like, government intelligence. He's not involved with intelligence agencies or governments. He deals with private corporations, doing intelligence work for private corporations, doing reports, going to meetings, things and such like that, gathering information. This is the type of work that this guy did. He was a business intelligence person, not a sort of normal like CIA or MI6 or something like that. He had no experience in that field at all, and much less did he ever have any interest, nor did any of his subsources, with the exception of one, who he alludes to having worked at some time, for some time, a relatively short period of time, for the FSB. But that's because he got caught up in something, and the FSB said, well, if you don't work for us, do some work for us, we're going to throw you in jail or something. So he kind of got caught up in something and was forced to work for a certain period of time for the FSB. But note, he's not really this person was not really like a high-level intelligence figure or anything like that. He was kind of a low-level grunt. The three sources that seemed to be the most important of the six was source number 2, which is a man, and the description of him sounds a lot like Sergei Milian. Sounds a lot like Sergei Milian. I'm not 100% sure it's Sergei Milian, but the general description, I know it's a man, and the general description sounds a lot like Sergei Milian. Same way that he's generally described by most people. The two most, and he was probably one of the most important sources, and meaning he provided a lot of the information. The other two most important sources were sources 3 and 5. And sources 3 and 5 were both females. One of them was pretty fluent in Russian, did travel to Russia a lot, was based primarily in the U.S., and had a lot of contacts there. And then the other female apparently is Russian and lives in Russia, but, visits other places outside of Russia, not too much to the U.S. She doesn't come to the U.S. very much, but does travel abroad sometimes outside of Russia, but she does stay in Russia or works in Russia or whatever. So essentially, all of these contacts that this subsource had, none of them really were what you would say Russian government officials, bureaucrats, or anything like that. They were all his friends. They were people who he had made friendships with, having met them either in Russia or as a result of his work the things that he did, work related, that he crossed paths with them and became friends with them. So when he's reaching out to them, trying to get some information, he's not reaching out to people that would be in the know or people who had real contacts. They were just friends of his that he had beers with, and they were all in different lines of work. None of them really, nobody here really in the intelligence business, nobody here really, as far as we could tell, politically connected or anything like that. The sixth source was literally a Russian individual who made contact one time. They tried to set up a meeting, but he never showed up to that meeting. It was roughly a 1-2 minute phone call where he dropped a little bit of information and would not disclose his name or his location, but apparently he was Russian And so that's all there is to that sixth source. He really plays no role in anything. It was primarily the source 2, the man, and the 2 women, sources 3 and 5. So let's go ahead and look at some of my notes. Yeah, like I said, this guy, the subsource, again, not Russian, appeared to be grow up, born, raised in the UK, comes to the US, gets a PhD, then he continues studies. He goes to Russia, where he continues studying, and he talks to a lot of academics, researchers, people like that. He's not associated with the government, intelligence agencies, the military. That's not his purview at all. He is totally about academics and things like that, research people. And again, he's in the business world, not in the intelligence world. And the same is true for his friends. None of these people would really have had any real intelligence. And what's amazing about this is when the FBI are questioning the subsource, and they're saying, okay, so you got this story from what, this subsource 3 or subsource 5, and okay, so where did they get it? Well, I don't really know their true source. I don't really know the end source, but I know that they knew this person. It was like she knew this person who at one time knew so-and-so, who was connected to this person and that person. And he talked to her, and she said that she would get some information and get back. And so she talked to this guy who talked to this guy, and then they got back to her and said maybe it could be this or that. I mean, this is literally how this was done. I mean, the degree to which you get into hearsay. I mean, it wasn't like Steele had a source, the subsource had a source, and that was it. No. Steele's subsource had 6 people. One he only talked to once for 2 minutes, so really 5. And of those 5, just friends of his, people he had beers with and had conversation with. He's known him for years, met him, crossed paths with him when he was in Russia, going through his schooling or meeting in these think tanks or research projects, academics. That's the type of people we're talking with. And they would talk to someone who would talk to someone who had heard from someone. I mean, that's how crazy this is. Nothing could ever be verified. This is why the Steele dossier could never be verified, because there's too many. It's all hearsay. It's chains of hearsay. It's not just hearsay from 1 or 2 people removed. It's like 3, 4, 5, 6 people removed, and people that they're not even identified. Just, well, I know someone who knows someone, and they heard this. I mean, literally, this is what we're talking about, and this is why Lindsey Graham says these people are probably going to jail, and they should, because there was no evidence here at all. This was not evidence. This was just, even like I say, even the subsource is telling the FBI, they're like, he's like, I couldn't source it. I don't even know who these people are. I know who my friends are. I'm calling my friends. I mean, Christopher Steele tells me that he wants me to investigate, Manafort, Michael Cohen, and Carter Page. I don't even know who these people are. I'm not a political person. I don't even know who any of these people are. But I have some friends who are in Russia or travel to Russia or know a lot about Russia or speak Russian or have Russian contacts in academia, in the business world or whatever. And so I called them just to see if do they know anybody. And they're like, well, I'd like to help out. I don't know. Let me make a few phone calls. And they make a few phone calls, talk to someone who knew someone who knew someone, and they may have heard this rumor or whatever. And that was reported back to Steele. He puts it down as a report is a legitimate fact. And this is literally what we're talking about here. That's how bad this is. So this guy here, the subsource, becomes a private consultant. He helped develop this business intelligence network of friends and colleagues who are spread out mostly in the U.S. and Russia. He said none of his contacts were in the U.K. None of his contacts were in the U.K. They either were U.S. or Russia based. He talks about the FBI asked him how he communicated with Christopher Steele, and he said, well, Christopher Steele had a policy he really didn't like to communicate, and he only wanted to do it if it was absolutely necessary, and only when he wanted to instruct me to do something. He said so he didn't like to communicate a lot, and he said when they did communicate, he said it was through Skype or by email. So the subsource communicated with Christopher Steele by Skype and by email, but only when it was really necessary. It wasn't like casually they're talking or Skyping or emailing a lot, only if it was really important. And he said there was one other secure email thing that they did that had like a secured email. Other than that, he said that's really all the communication was. He had one in-face meeting with Christopher Steele. One time where Christopher Steele flew him over to the UK and had a meeting with him while he was in the UK. A couple meetings while he was there for a couple days in the UK. That's the only time he met with Steele personally, was the one time. Other than that, it was just occasionally Skype and email, and only when Steele really had something for him. And primarily what Steele asked this subsource to do was to dig into Manafort, dig into Cohen, dig into Carter Page, and find some dirt on him. And particularly with Manafort, to really focus on Ukraine. And so that's what this source was tasked with. Now, the subsource tells the FBI, he says, you know, when Steele first gave me this work to do, he said I was, you know, kind of surprised because this is not what I do. I'm not in the political world. I'm not in the intelligence world. I don't know people in the political or intelligence world. I don't know a bunch of government spooks or spies. All the people I deal with are business people who are in the business world. So he said I was really surprised that he asked me to look into these political figures that I didn't know anything about, and to be looking into things that are more like intelligence, which is not my area of expertise. But he said things were pretty slow at Orbis. I only had one other case that I was working on doing reports for, so I had the time and I want to get paid, so I went ahead and, you know, made the effort. He did also say that while he was working for Orbis on this research on Manafort and Cohen and all the rest, and pretty much most of the research that he and others do there at Orbis, he says it's mostly open source research. You know, they're not connected to any intelligence agencies. They don't get stuff like that. They mostly do open source research, just like Nellie Orr. He said he was never told who the final clients were or ever really briefed on why or who this information was being collected for. He was just told, dig up some dirt on Manafort, tell me what he's doing in Ukraine, dig into this guy Carter Page, Michael Cohen. Christopher Steele never told the subsource that he was working for Fusion GPS, never told the subsource he was talking to the media, never told the subsource that it had anything to do with the election, the Clinton campaign, or anything else. Christopher Steele never really gave the subsource very much information about why he was doing what he was doing. He was just being asked to do it. Also, Christopher Steele kept this subsource secret. He wasn't allowed to tell anyone. He signed a non-disclosure agreement with Orbis Intelligence when he was hired. He wasn't allowed to talk about the fact that he worked for Orbis. And they kept it very, very secret. In fact, he told the FBI, he said, you're the first people that, outside of people at Orbis that I've ever told or now know that I work for Orbis. He told the FBI he had no contact with any Russian intelligence or security people in Russia, only bureaucrats and think tankers and people in academia, people in the business world, mainly who he dealt with in Russia, who were his friends and people he'd make acquaintance with. No intelligence or security people at all. He said that Steele, here's what I found very, very interesting. Check this out. Check this out. This is in this interview with the subsource. This subsource tells the FBI questioners that Steele put him onto Manafort regarding wanting him to look into Manafort and his association with Ukraine and corruption around March of 2016. March of 2016. We were told that Steele wasn't brought in by the Clinton campaign until, what, June of 2016. But here is this subsource telling the FBI that Steele put him onto the investigation into Manafort back in March of 2016. Steele was working for someone, and we assume it was Confusion GPS, on behalf of Hillary in March of 2016. Unless that's when the Washington Free Beacon was paying them, in which case that means that Christopher Steele would have been working for Simpson when the Washington Free Beacon was paying him. But the bottom line, regardless of who he was working for, up to this point, until this interview, we were been told all this time for the past 3.5 years that Steele wasn't brought in by Confusion GPS and Perkins Coie until early summer, June of 2016. Well, here he is telling the FBI, no, he was contacted by Steele in March of 2016 and told to dig into Manafort. He also was told by Christopher Steele, just in general, to investigate Trump and Clinton and the U.S. election. So Steele wants this subsource not just to dig into Trump and people around him and just the election in general to investigate what all is going on. He also mentioned it's okay to look at Hillary Clinton too. She's paying Christopher Steele and he's investigating her. Of course, I mentioned he had 2 female sources. There are sources 3 and 5. Source 5 was the one who produced the information, that false information, that Page had met with Igor Sechin and had a meeting. We now know that's false. That would have been source 5, the female. This subsource tells the FBI that there was a heavy amount of activity that really picked up in July and August of 2016, which would certainly match up with my timeline when there was a lot of things going on in July and August of 2016. I already told you source 6 was a man. They had one phone call with him that lasted about a minute or 2. He never identified himself. He was a Russian. And then we find out that after the dossier was published by BuzzFeed, that Steele was laying very low, and that everyone around Orbis was concerned about his well-being. They were concerned about his well-being after the dossier was released. This subsource says that after the BuzzFeed release of the dossier, that Orbis received within about a week 20,000 emails. The subsource also told the FBI that he thought his life would be in danger if his name leaked out. So what did he do? He stayed in Russia and laid low. Subsource went to Russia and hung out and laid low. He also told the FBI that Christopher Steele had been probing Alpha Bank for 10 years, long before Crossfire Hurricane, and probably back around the time even predating the FIFA soccer scandal. So again, this is really all you can get out of it from reading that. That's pretty much a general description of 3 hours of reading. That's all I could come up with, because it's so many redactions. It's all still very confusing. I'm not sure I still understand what I read. But my general feeling was, as I was reading about, particularly about this one female source and the fact that she's doing open source research, this guy doesn't know anything about political people, but somehow it appears that he's describing someone that sounds like Milian. This thing, there's a lot of Russia connections here and people with experience working in Russia. They know Russians and all this sort of thing. I couldn't help at some point toward the middle, toward the end of reading this, I just kept having these gut feelings, gut urges that maybe we were talking about. Well, I kind of figured out the source number 2, the man, sounded a lot like Sergei Milian. I can't be 100% certain, but it kind of sounds like the description we've heard of Sergei Milian before. Of course, he's the Belarusian guy. lives in the United States, has lived in the United States. Trump supporter, by the way. Trump supporter. Hardcore Trump supporter. Donated to his campaign. Supports him. But one of the women, the way he's describing her and the type of work she did, having these contacts, having visited, being kind of passionate about the country of Russia, speaking the language fluently, doing open source research, got me to thinking, man, is he describing Nellie Orr? And once I started thinking about that, and I started thinking about, wait a minute, this guy's in the States. He's not a real political guy, but he's got a lot of connections with a lot of people that do a lot of reporting on corruption and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, I wonder if this guy knows Glenn Simpson, Fusion GPS. And by the time I get to the end of it, sleep on it, wake up, think about it some more, my gut tells me, and I don't know, this is probably a stretch, but I'm just putting it out there just because I read it. Maybe some of you did too. I don't know what your feelings were, but I got the feeling that there's some connection here between this subsource or some of his sources and Confusion GPS. I smell a Confusion GPS presence around either the subsource or his 6, really 5 sources, his friends, and I just got a feeling, a gut instinct, that there's something, some connection to Fusion GPS with either this guy or some of his sources. I don't know if that's true. At some point, maybe we'll find out who these sources are. Maybe we never will. Steele only knew the name, first and last name, of one of them. He only knew the first name of one of them and didn't know the names, first or last, of any of the additional 4. So Steele, even if he was brought in, and put a gun to his head, he couldn't give you the names of 4 of the 6. He could only give you the first name of one of them, and he could give you the whole name of one source that was talking to the subsource. And the subsource fears if his name comes out, his life might be in danger. Yes, but the general feeling, you do see him describe to the FBI his take on Steele's work and what was in and he is very surprised. He was very surprised, number one, because he has no experience in this type of business, that Steele would put him on this type of an investigation. And he was flabbergasted, very surprised that things that were in the Steele dossier had been attributed to him, because some of it was stuff he'd never even heard of before. Most of it was stuff that he had given Steele, but it was complete, rumor. It was 4, 5, 6, 7 people removed and hearsay. There was no real intelligence. There was no documents. There was no body that Steele or anyone else could go interview and sit down and say, okay, tell me what you saw, tell me what you heard. There was just nothing that could ever be corroborated, which is why they could never corroborate the dossier. Steele couldn't even corroborate it. His subsource really couldn't corroborate it, because it was the FBI said, could you back any of this? We said, these are my friends, and I'm asking my friends, hey man, are you sure? Is that pretty true? Well, that's what I heard from someone who's been hearing from someone else who knows this guy, who heard it from someone that this is going on. This is literally what they're telling me, what he's telling the FBI. And he was surprised that Steele would put this in a report and give it to the FBI, and was amazed that they would try to get FISA warrants based on it. So yeah, it's bad. It's really bad. Even with it redacted to hell and back, it's bad. We do have time for just a quick news drop from Judicial Watch. Judicial Watch has received some more of the Strzok Page text and emails that they've been requesting for a very long time. And it appears that Peter's been stroking us and the Crossfire Hurricane team were taken out of the loop after Trump was elected. Peter's been stroking us was very angry because he wanted to be in on any action that could help him ensnare the president or any member of his incoming administration. Peter's been stroking us emailed Bill Priestap the day after the inauguration and told him that he could have folded the FBI briefing into his strategy for investigating Trump associates. And we also learned that Comey began targeting Trump from the very first day he stepped foot in the White House. More to come from those Judicial Watch emails, by the way. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you tomorrow. Bye.